the warrior's moonlit path. Tonight, we follow the quiet footsteps of a weary Viking warrior named Arvid, a man separated from his clan after a fierce and chaotic battle. All through the long day, the clash of shields and the roar of war had thundered across the cliffs. Men had shouted their war cries into the salt, wet wind. Steel had sung against steel, and the earth had trembled beneath the stamping of boots. On the edge of a high fjord, where rock met sky and sea, the battle raged, echoing off stone like the anger of ancient gods. In the frenzy of combat, as Arvid fought side by side with his shield brothers, the ground beneath him gave way. The cliffside, already weakened by time and weather, crumbled. He felt the world vanish from under his feet. For a brief, weightless heartbeat, there was only sky and roaring wind. And then the icy impact of the fjord swallowed him whole. The cold seized him like a fist. The world became a rush of dark water, white froth, and the muffled thuds of distant battle fading above. Armor dragged at his limbs, pulling him downward. He kicked instinctively, fighting the heaviness, fighting the darkness. A flash of sky appeared through the water, a circle of pale light. His chest burned. He reached for it and slowly, inch by inch, rose toward air. He broke the surface with a gasp, coughing water from his lungs. The noise of battle was distant now, muffled by walls of rock. Waves rolled beneath him, carrying him away from the fight. He tried to swim toward the shore, but the current had its own will. It tugged at him, carrying him along the jagged base of the cliffs, past shadowed inlets and dark stone faces. Time blurred. There was only the rhythm of waves, the sting of salt, the ache in his arms, and the dim awareness that he must keep his head above water. At last, the current released him. It pushed him toward a small crescent of shoreline, where pebbles and smooth stones waited. His body washed up there like driftwood, armor scraping against rock. Then, everything went still. The waves hissed softly as they rose and fell, and night drifted slowly down over the world. Now, beneath the soft silver glow of the rising moon, Arvid slowly opened his eyes. For a time, he did not move. His mind floated somewhere between waking and dream, suspended like a leaf in a calm pool. His armor felt as if it had turned to stone around him, chilled through with fjord water. Every limb throbbed with a deep, heavy fatigue. But he lived. He breathed. The first sound that reached his ears was not the roar of battle or the cry of the wounded. It was the calm and rhythmic lap of the fjord's waves against the stones of the shore, a quiet, steady sound like a whispered lullaby. He blinked slowly, clearing the blur from his vision. The sky above him was a deep, velvet blue sprinkled with stars. The moon hung low over the horizon, soft and luminous, casting a silver path across the water. Behind him, the forest stood tall and dark, a wall of shadowed trunks and branches. The air smelled of pine sap, damp moss, and cold seawater. Arvid listened to the night. The battle was gone, erased by distance and the turning of the earth. No shouts, no clang of metal, no thunder of fists on shields. Only wave and wind. The silence felt unfamiliar, like stepping into a room after a great storm has passed and finding nothing broken. Slowly, he pushed himself onto his side, then up onto his elbows. Pain flared across his ribs, but it was a dull, survivable ache. His fingers dug into the pebbles beneath him, feeling their smooth, rounded surfaces. He took a slow breath, filling his lungs with the cold, crisp air, letting it clear his thoughts. His clan, he thought. Where are they? They could be miles away along the shore, or camped just beyond the ridge. They might have driven the enemy back and regrouped inland. They might be searching for survivors even now. The uncertainty felt heavy, but it did not crush him. Instead, it gave him purpose. Nearby, along the high tide mark, driftwood lay scattered. Broken branches, smooth logs, splintered planks. Arvid rose unsteadily to his feet, his legs trembling like those of a newborn foal. He staggered up the shore, gathering the driest pieces he could find. His fingers, numb from cold, fumbled with the wood, but the movements became easier as a quiet determination took over. He found a small hollow near the edge of the trees where the wind was gentler, sheltered by rocks and a leaning pine. There he arranged the driftwood and dried seaweed he had collected. From a pouch at his belt, miraculously still tied, he pulled a small flint and piece of steel. He struck them together, sending tiny sparks into the prepared kindling. The first few died on contact, swallowed by the dampness, but he did not give up. Again and again he struck, until one spark caught, then another, and a faint orange glow began to grow. He leaned close, cupping his hands to shield the ember from the breeze. Softly, he breathed life into it, each exhale coaxing the small glow into something brighter. The ember spread into a thin line of flame, then another. The dried seaweed crackled gently as fire began to take hold. With patient care, Arvid fed small sticks, then larger ones, until at last a modest fire flickered steadily at his feet. Warmth reached for him, tentative at first, then more certain. The light pushed back the darkness, drawing gentle shadows along the rocks and the trunks of nearby trees. The sound of the fire, soft pops and crackles, was comforting, like the murmured conversations of familiar voices. Arvid lowered himself beside the flames and closed his eyes for a moment. Faces appeared in his mind, his chieftain, his shield brothers, the elders of his clan. He thought of the ones who might have fallen on the cliffs above, and a quiet ache settled in his chest. He placed a hand over his heart and bowed his head. In a low voice, he whispered a prayer to Odin, the wanderer, the one-eyed god, the seeker of wisdom who walked among men in hidden form. Odin, who knew the feel of roads beneath his feet and the uncertainty of distant horizons. Odin, Arvid murmured, his voice rough with seawater and fatigue. All-Father, I have been torn from the battle, cast into the sea, and brought to this lonely shore. Watch over those who fought beside me. Guide their steps, and guide mine. Let me not wander this night without your eye upon me. Show me the path back to my people. The flames danced as he spoke, sending up a spray of glowing embers that mingled briefly with the stars before fading into the cool air. It felt, in some small way, like an answer. He warmed his hands by the fire until feeling returned to his fingers in prickling waves. Carefully, he unbuckled a piece of his armor to let the heat reach his chilled skin. His body shook once, then slowly steadied. When he finally rose, the moon had climbed higher into the sky. The fire had burned down to a sturdy bed of coals and slow-burning wood, steady enough to keep glowing without his constant attention. He took one last look at the sheltered hollow, memorizing its location in case he needed to return, then turned toward the forest. The trees waited, tall pillars of darkness, silent and still. Beyond them lay the unknown, cliffs, valleys, rivers, and perhaps the camp of his clan. Arvid stepped beneath the first branches and into the woods. The forest floor was soft, with centuries of fallen needles, damp soil, and patches of moss that caught the moonlight like velvet. Each step he took was muffled, as though the earth itself wished to keep his passing secret. The trunks rose around him, straight and tall, their bark rough beneath drifting veils of lichen. Branches interlaced overhead, forming a living roof that caught most of the moonlight and broke it into scattered fragments on the ground. He walked slowly, his senses tuned to the gentle noises of the night. An owl called from somewhere high above, its low hoot echoing softly between the trees. Tiny creatures scurried through the underbrush, their bodies barely visible as shadows flitting from root to root. The wind moved through the forest like a quiet breath, rustling needles and leaves with a sound like distant whispers. The deeper Arvid went, the more the scents of the forest enveloped him. The tang of resin from freshly broken twigs, the rich, loamy scent of damp earth, the faint sweetness of wild flowers hidden in the dark. Here, far from the smoke and blood of battle, the world felt gentler, as though the land itself wanted to soothe the wounds of the day. But the forest also held its mysteries, and not all sounds brought comfort. After some time, Arvid paused. To his left, deeper in the shadows, something moved, a rustling slow and deliberate, too heavy for a small animal. He reached for the axe at his belt, fingers curling around the solid, familiar grip. He did not raise it, but he was ready. His breath came slow and even, his eyes adjusting to the dim. From between the trees stepped a wolf. Its fur was a pale, ghostly grey, almost silver in the moonlight. It was larger than most wolves he had seen, with lean muscle beneath its coat and eyes that caught the light with a soft, otherworldly glimmer. The wolf stopped and regarded him. There was no snarl, no crouch of shoulders ready to spring, only stillness. The two of them studied each other in the quiet of the forest, the weary warrior and the silent hunter. Arvid spoke softly, the way one might address an old acquaintance. "I mean no harm, friend. I seek only my people." His voice did not tremble. It carried the calm acceptance of someone who had already faced death once that day and been spared. The wolf tilted its head, ears flicking as though listening to more than his words. Then, with a blink of its pale eyes, it turned away. Its paws made almost no sound as it walked back into the depths of the forest and disappeared among the trees. Arvid let out a breath he had not realized he was holding and released his grip on the axe. The forest closed around him again, peaceful as before. Time became difficult to measure. The moon drifted slowly across the sky, visible now and then through gaps in the branches. Arvid came to a small clearing where the trees stepped back and the grass rose in soft waves, dotted with low wildflowers that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Dew clung to their petals like tiny stars. He crossed the clearing at a measured pace, letting himself absorb the tranquility of the open space. A hare darted through the grass ahead of him, stopping briefly to look back before vanishing into the shadows at the other side. The odor of damp stone and distant water grew stronger. Somewhere beyond the line of trees, a stream murmured quietly over rocks. Arvid reached the stream soon after. Its water shone black and silver in the moonlight. He knelt at the bank, scooped a handful to his lips, and drank. The cold was sharp but clean. It washed the remaining taste of salt from his mouth and soothed the dryness in his throat. Small fish flickered beneath the surface, darting in and out of patches of reflected sky. He lingered there for a time, listening to the gentle gurgle of the water and the whisper of the breeze through the reeds. Then he rose and continued along the stream's course, letting it guide him deeper into the forest. Water had a way of knowing where it was going. Perhaps, he thought, it would lead him where he needed to be. After some time, the stream widened into a small pool enclosed by rocks and roots. Mist hovered above its surface in thin, curling veils, glowing faintly with the reflected moonlight. At the far side of the pool, half hidden in the mist, Arvid saw a ring of stones rising from the earth. Ancient, weathered, arranged in a circle that spoke of hands long gone from the world. Something about the place felt old, older than his clan, older than the stories of his grandfather's grandfather. The air there was stiller, thicker, as though listening. Arvid stepped carefully between the stones, bowing his head out of instinctive respect. "Spirits of this land," he whispered, his voice barely disturbing the silence. "I pass through your hall as a guest. I seek not to take, only to travel. If it pleases you, watch over my steps." The mist curled around his legs and then slowly parted before him, clearing a narrow path that led beyond the stones. Arvid did not know if it was coincidence or answer, but he accepted it with quiet gratitude. The forest beyond the ancient stones seemed somehow gentler. The path beneath his feet felt more sure. The tree trunks were spaced just wide enough to make passage easy. The roots no longer reached for his ankles so hungrily. As he walked, exhaustion crept over him like a slow, heavy tide. The adrenaline that it has kept him moving since the battle finally began to fade. Every muscle ached with the lingering strain of fighting, of falling, of swimming, of trudging through the forest. He realized he could not walk all night. His body needed rest if he was to make it through whatever journey still lay ahead of him. At last, he found a small hollow beneath the outstretched branches of a wide, low pine. The ground there was soft with years of fallen needles. The tree's limbs bowed low enough to form a kind of natural shelter, shielding the spot from wind and dew. Arvid gathered a few fallen branches and kindling from nearby, careful not to strip any living tree more than necessary. He built another small fire, taking comfort in the familiar ritual. The flame took more easily this time, fed by dry twigs and his now steady hands. He sat beside the fire, watching the flames curl and dance. His thoughts drifted to his clan, to his chieftain's stern but fair gaze, to the broad shoulders of the warriors he had fought beside, to the children who would be waiting in the village, listening for news of the battle. He wondered who had survived. He wondered who had not. His chest tightened, but he forced himself to breathe slowly, rhythmically, the way he had been taught when fear tried to take hold. He lifted his eyes to the sky, visible through the branches. Stars peeked between the needles like watchful eyes. Somewhere up there, he thought, Odin traveled with his ravens, gathering stories, watching men, learning what paths they chose. Arvid spoke softly to the night. If this is a test, All-Father, know that I will walk it fully. Just let it end with me standing beside my people once more. The fire crackled, sending a gentle spray of sparks upward. None of them flew far. They vanished quickly, as though the forest itself did not wish to see them stray. Arvid eased himself down onto the bed of pine needles, rolling his cloak beneath his head as a makeshift pillow. The smell of pine sap and smoke wrapped around him. The sound of the fire mixed with the soft rustle of the forest. The weight of his eyelids grew heavier with each breath. His last waking thought was of home. The longhouse with its carved beams, the familiar creak of its wooden floor, the glow of the central hearth, and the faces of those he loved gathered close against the cold. Sleep claimed him gently. He did not dream of battle or falling or the cold grip of the sea. Instead, his dreams were filled with long winding paths through sunlit forests, where the leaves shone bright and green, and distant laughter echoed between the trees. He dreamed of walking those paths with people whose faces were indistinct, yet comforting, as if the forest itself walked beside him in human form. When morning came, it did so gradually. The darkness softened to deep blue, then to grey, and finally to a pale gold that filtered through the branches overhead. Arvid stirred, blinked, and slowly sat up. Stiffness pulsed through his muscles, but the rest had eased the worst of his fatigue. The fire had died down to a small pile of warm ash and coals. Birds sang from the treetops, their clear notes weaving together into a gentle chorus. The air smelled fresher, touched by hints of dew and new light. Arvid took a moment to orient himself, then rose and stamped out the last of the heat from the coals, burying them under a thin layer of soil. He tightened his armor, adjusted the straps of his belt, and rolled his shoulders, shaking off the lingering heaviness of sleep. Above him, a shadow passed across the brightening sky. He looked up, raising a hand to shield his eyes from the low morning sun. There, circling quietly overhead, was the eagle. Its dark wings were broad and short, cutting through the air with easy grace. The bird glided in a slow spiral, then angled its body and drifted toward the west. Arvid felt a quiet, grateful smile touch his lips. "Still with me," he murmured. "Then I will follow." He set off once more, moving through the forest in the direction the eagle had taken. In daylight, the woods felt different, less mysterious, more clearly defined. The trunks of the trees stood like pillars holding up a green roof. Ferns brushed his legs as he walked. Shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy, illuminating patches of moss and wildflowers in bright, golden pools. He passed a family of deer grazing in a small meadow. The largest among them lifted its head, watched him for a moment, then, finding no threat in his slow and steady gait, returned to eating. The squirrel scolded him from a branch above, chattering briefly before leaping to another tree and disappearing. Time again became fluid. The sun climbed higher, marking the passage of hours. Arvid's stomach growled, and he stopped near a cluster of bushes heavy with small dark berries. He plucked a few, rolling them between his fingers, and cautiously tasted one. It was tart but not bitter, and he recognized it from foraging trips with the elders of his clan. He ate modestly enough to quiet the gnawing in his belly, then continued on. By midday, he reached the edge of the forest and emerged onto a rocky slope overlooking a wide stretch of land. In the distance, he could see the glimmer of the fjord winding like a silver snake between the mountains. Closer, he saw patches of low shrubs, boulders worn smooth by wind and time, and to the far right, a narrow trail that seemed to lead down toward a valley. He paused there, letting the breeze wash over him. It carried with it a faint scent. Smoke just barely noticeable beneath the stronger smells of stone and vegetation. Not the acrid, choking smoke of burning buildings, but the softer smell of wood fires, campfires, cooking fires. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, trying to trace its origin. It seemed to drift from the valley below, carried up by the terrain. When he opened his eyes again, the eagle was circling lower, closer. It let out a clear, ringing cry that echoed against the rocks. Then it banked sharply and glided down toward the valley, disappearing from view beyond the ridge. Arvid's heart beat a little faster. He began to descend. The slope was steep in places, forcing him to move carefully, using his hand to steady himself on protruding rocks. Loose stones shifted underfoot, clattering softly down the incline. But he kept his balance. His boots found purchase on patches of moss and exposed roots. As he moved lower, the smoke smell grew stronger. He thought he heard something else too, carried faintly on the breeze. A rhythm, subtle but distinct. The beat of a drum, slow and steady like a heartbeat. By the time he reached the valley floor, the sun had begun to dip again. Shadows lengthened across the grass. The drum beats, if they were real, faded into the background hum of the world. But the smoke was undeniable now, a pale grey whisper rising beyond a stand of trees ahead. Arvid moved toward it, his step slower, more cautious. If it was his clan, he would be home. If it was not, he would need to know who else had made camp in these lands. He slipped once more under the cover of trees, moving as quietly as his armor allowed. The ground here was softer, the air thicker with the smell of cookfires, leather, and the faint metallic tang of weapons. Voices reached him, muffled at first, then clearer as he drew closer. Words, laughter, a few tired curses, the low murmur of conversation. His chest tightened. The voices were familiar. The cadence of speech, the rough humor, the shared language of men who had fought beside him dozens of times before. He edged around a final cluster of trees and stepped into the open. There, in a wide clearing ringed by the forest, stood his clan. A great fire burned at the center, its flames sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. Around it, warriors sat on stones, logs, and furs. Some held bandaged arms or leaned heavily on spears, evidence of the battle they had survived. Others laughed quietly, exchanging weary jokes. A few sat apart, lost in their own thoughts, gazes distant. Tents and makeshift shelters ringed the clearing, their canvas sides flapping softly in the evening breeze. Shields were propped against stakes in orderly rows. Bows and quivers hung from low branches. Arvid stood at the edge of the clearing, taking it all in, feeling a slow, powerful wave of relief wash through him. For a moment, he didn't move. He simply let the sight of them fill him, anchoring him back into the world he knew. Then one of the warriors near the fire glanced up and saw him. The man's eyes widened. He rose to his feet, nearly knocking over the log he had been sitting on. "Arvid!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the hum of camp noise. "By the gods, he lives!" Heads turned, voices rose. A path opened as men stepped aside, some in surprise, others with broad grins spreading across their faces. Arvid walked forward on legs that suddenly felt lighter. Hands reached for him, clapping his shoulders, gripping his forearms, pulling him briefly into rough embraces. He saw his chieftain, standing at the far side of the fire, arms crossed, a rare smile softening his usually stern face. "You fell," the chieftain said simply, his voice carrying easily over the fire's crackle. "We saw you vanish with the cliff. The sea took you." "And then returned me," Arvid replied quietly. "It seems I still have some path left to walk among the living." A ripple of approving murmurs circled the fire. Someone laughed. Someone else muttered a quick prayer of thanks under their breath. They brought him to a place beside the fire, spreading a thick fur for him to sit on. A bowl of stew was pressed into his hands, meat, roots, herbs, hot and fragrant. Steam curled upward, warming his face. He ate slowly, savoring each bite as though it were the first real food he had ever tasted. As he ate, he told them, in brief and simple words, of falling, of the sea, of waking on the shore. He did not embellish the story. He did not need to. The quiet, steady way he spoke was enough. He mentioned the forest, the wolf, the ancient standing stones, the mist, the stream. He spoke of the eagle that had watched over him and the prayers he'd whispered to Odin in the firelit dark. When he finished, a hush followed his words. The fire cracked and spat. Somewhere, an owl hooted from the tree line. "The All-Father walked with you," one of the elders said finally, his voice both gentle and certain. "You were not lost, only led by a longer road." Arvid felt a deep, quiet peace settle inside him. He looked around at the faces of his kin, tired, bruised, some bandaged, all alive. He thought of the paths they had yet to walk together. Battles, winters, feasts, stories yet to be told. The eagle cried once in the distance. Arvid looked up and caught a glimpse of its dark shape against the moon, circling high above the camp. Then it turned and drifted away into the night, its work complete. Warmth from the fire seeped through the fur beneath him into his muscles and bones. His eyelids grew heavy. The sounds of the camp, the murmur of conversation, the clink of bowls, the low shuckle of laughter, blurred into a comforting background hum. He eased himself down until he lay fully on the fur, turning onto his side to face the fire. The flames danced before him in slow, mesmerizing patterns. The night air was cool, but the heat from the hearth balanced it perfectly. His breath slowed. In and out. In and out. He felt safe. He felt warm. He felt home. After the longest, hardest journey of his life, Arvid allowed sleep to claim him at last. There among his people, beneath the watchful sky and the gentle glow of the fire. And so Arvid's weary path came to its peaceful end, for this night at least. The forest settled into quiet around the camp. The fjord glimmered softly in the distance under the moon's calm light. The eagle flew on to other horizons. The gods watched, silent and distant as men rested from their struggles. As you too let your eyes grow heavy, feel the calm of the northern wind on your skin, the warmth of the fire at your side, and the deep, quiet peace that comes at the end of a long journey. You have walked far in your own way. You have come through your own storms and battles. Tonight you are safe. Tonight you are warm. And your path, for now, has led you home. Good night.